The Speaking of Cults podcast is presented solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from it is at the user's own risk. The views, information, or opinions expressed by the host and guests are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical or other professional advice.
Hello, everybody. This is Chris Shelton. I'm Jon Atack. You probably know that by now. This is about our 700th show together. It's about 30-something by now.
It's about 30. Yeah, it's about 30. Hey, John.
And we're still talking to each other. Imagine that.
I know. Speaking of cults, that is what we do. And boy, we have the best talks. These are you are absolutely. I mean, obviously, you're my favorite recurring guest on my podcast, as well as being a wonderful friend. So, hey, everybody out there, let's do a show. We're going to talk about some Scientology stuff this time. I think, John, what do you have for us here?
This is
the Cult of Greed.
The Cult of Greed, which was an homage to Rich Behar's article in Time, The Cult of Greed and Power, I think it was called.
Yes.
I was asked to give a talk in St. Petersburg back when we were still allowed to go there in 2014. Not the one in Florida, the original one, Leningrad, as it was also known, Petrograd. Mm-hmm. And my friend, Professor Alexander Dvorkin, asked me to go and give this talk, and it was incredible. I gave a talk to 200 men in black, all these priests with this stuff on, and it's great when you give the simultaneous translation thing, because you get the laugh 10 seconds afterwards.
Right.
If you get the laugh at all, But
right.
They said that I'd got an hour and 40 minutes, and so I wrote to the second this piece. And I got there, and they were starting to come on the stage, and the priests were coming from all over Europe, ones from Jerusalem and Poland and Ukraine, of course, that time, and announcing themselves. And this thing just went on interminably, how pleased they were to be there. It's like, look, could we just stand up as a group and say we're all really pleased to be here and get on with it?
Right.
And Sasha turned to me and he said, you have half an hour. And I said, I was told I got an hour and 40 minutes. I've got like however long to strip this down. Fortunately, the mayor or the head of the Duma in the St. Petersburg Parliament declined to come the next day, having been put off. So I got 2 periods and was able to do the whole thing. So this was a talk that I gave. And the thought was, these people know absolutely nothing about Scientology. What are the important things? What are the vital documents? What's the vital evidence to put in front of people? Mm-hmm. And, I will admit, I put a little bit of an emphasis on the anti-Christian aspects of Scientology. Mm. So it's really just a collection of these things. And I'm very pleased to say that the talk was split over 2 days. And after the second one, I was staying in the Lavra, which is sort of like a monastery, quite big. There are only 2 of them in Russia. And you're at the top of Nevsky Prospect. Nevsky Prospect, when Peter the Great built St. Petersburg in about 1720, this amazing Russian Baroque city. It's just beautiful, and I loathe Baroque stuff, particularly Spanish Baroque, which is like appalling. But this is really, really looks good. And You've got the prospect runs right down to the harbour. And at the top of it is the Lavra. And I get there, and because of the danger of Scientology, they've kind of gone, well, we need you to be secure. You can stay in the Lavra. So hundreds of monks there and all of this stuff. And I go there, and it's like a little hotel room, and I sleep in it. It's only the next day I find out that behind the wall is the altar in the cathedral, St. Petersburg. I might have been, it's said that Richard Dawkins says he won't walk in graveyards at night. I don't know what he's frightened of, given what he professes. But right. I might have been a bit spooked by this thought that the grand altar of this, and it was just an incredible time. They I'm heartbroken about what's happening between Russia and Ukraine now, because I saw Russian and Ukrainian priests cuddling each other and being happy together. But I got to deliver this talk and then sort of thought, well, I many years ago wrote a little booklet called The Total Freedom Trap. And I came to revise it around the time I was writing this and went, I don't think this is relevant anymore. I think there's a quicker way. I think this booklet, so it's available as an audio book, it's available in print, it's available as an ebook. And the thought was, if you've been involved in Scientology and you want to explain it to somebody, then this is a way to go, rather than try and hit them with a big book. Your book or my Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky, which are fairly thorough. Give them the high points. So we start off with the UFO cult, which I think people ought to know. So the beginning of the book is, and you've heard this before, 75 million years ago, the evil Prince Xenu rounded up the populations of 76 plants and brought them to Earth, where their souls were dropped into volcanoes, blown up with hydrogen bombs, and gathered on electronic ribbons to be clustered together. This sounds like the creation of a science fiction writer, and it is.
Exactly.
And we then go on to hard selling. So we've got Les Dane's wonderful textbook, Big League.
Yes.
Sales Closing Techniques. And I was quite surprised coming to it, that never, capital letters, never let anyone simply walk out, and never let a student leave or quit. Introvert him like a bullet. You have to be willing to invade privacy, very definitely. Recruits don't have any rights. And this whole, when you kind of filter it through and you're just looking at the pure malevolence of L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah.
He says, in What is Life Worth? The Importance of Hard Sell. Hard sell, capital letters, is a must, capital letters, in dissemination and selling of services and materials. Elsewhere, he says, you tell him that he's going to sign up right now and he's going to take it right now. One does not describe something, one commands something. You will find that a lot of people are in a more or less hypnotic daze and they respond to direct commands.
There it is.
And out.
There it is.
Hard sell means insistence that people buy.
That's right. That's the thing that we talk about when we say Hubbard was really obvious about this. Like, it wasn't like he had to be real subtle. In his policies, in his directives to the staff, and that's what you're reading from there. This is how he directs Scientology staff to deal with the general public. They have derogatory words for the general public. They think less of them as people because they believe that they are enshrouded with this reactive mind that keeps them in this hypnotic daze all the time. And when we talk about how you dehumanize somebody, dehumanize them, right, to make it okay to treat them and control them and enslave them or dominate their minds, this is how Scientologists do it. It's a syrupy, sweet kind of gross thing of these poor, degraded human beings out there who are so screwed up, they don't even know how bad off they are. And it's only our beneficence that, that is our wonderful empathy and caring that we will take the time to deal with their awful reactive minds. And you have to control them and dominate them because they can't control themselves. That's the whole spirit of what you're imbued with or indoctrinated with as a Scientology staff member. And I was getting that at 17 years old. Yeah. I was being told this is how the world is, you know.
And the description of, as you say, raw meat, dead in the head, wogs. And of course, wogs in the UK is the N word.
That's right.
Not a word we use.
That's right. Which I had no idea of, by the way, when I was in. As an American, we had no idea that was how culturally inappropriate that was.
Yeah. I mean, it's mistakenly people say it means worthy Oriental gentleman. It does not. It means somebody whose skin color is darker than the average Briton.
That's right.
Then there's some stuff about Ron Hubbard, the source. It's got a nice little picture down here of his first novel, Buckskin Brigades.
That's right.
Of course, he would later claim in various places that he became a full blood brother. That's a brave, an active warrior with the Blackfoot people at the age of 2, at the age of 4, or at the age of 6. He makes all three claims. Of
Wow.
course, in Buckskin Brigades, his first novel in, I think, 1934, he says he got this information about the Blackfoot people from someone who'd actually known them. There's no claim that he knew them. And when his aunt, Margaret Roberts, who was 8 years older than him and was in the same household as him from him being 6 months old to being 12 years old, when she was asked by Russell Miller about the Blackfoot, she said, "I don't know what you're talking about."
Exactly.
So, yeah, and he's a nuclear
Hubbard
physicist.
lied? What's this now?
Yeah. And we have his Caribbean motion picture expedition. This is so I wanted to have the actual documents. So this is
Yes.
a contemporary news article from 1932.
Yes.
L. Ron Hubbard heads movie cruise among old piratical haunts. And of course, the article about what a complete failure it was signed L. Ron Hubbard. That the students were trying to sue him because they had achieved none of their objectives. They hadn't enacted any pirate battles at all. In fact, they hadn't got to their destinations. They'd had to go home.
Right.
Then
And
we have his.
and this is actually important not only because of the failure and the nonsense that Hubbard engaged in, but also the fact that he later told incredibly tall tales about this stuff to Scientologists about how successful he was during this time period, how this was something he demonstrated early leadership ability, and this was something that he had pulled off and organized when in fact the fact of the matter is that L. Ron Hubbard couldn't organize his way out of a wet paper bag. And that's what's demonstrated by your book in these clippings as to why these are so relevant to the cult of greed motif here.
Yeah, and we find his literary career, that This Is Fantastic magazine to which he contributed. Then we have this wonderful picture. A friend of mine actually went through the campaign ribbons here, and Hubbard hadn't been awarded any of them. He had a sharpshooter badge from when he was 16 as a Marine cadet, and he had service medals from the 3 areas of the war that he'd served in. That was it. And yet he displayed, there's a fake notice of departure from the Navy that's got 21 medals listed on it, which Scientology didn't use to hand out. And then they gave one to somebody who brought it to me. And it's got on it Purple Hearts, I think with an oak cluster where they were rewarded with a palm if there was a second one. So he's got a lie about the medals, which would not have been. And then, of course, you get pictures of Jack Parsons, Marjorie Cameron, who was to be the mother of Babylon, the mother of the Scarlet Whore, Scarlet Woman.
Right.
And here's the man with the funny hat who was Hubbard's greatest inspiration, Aleister Crowley, who also had a thing about triangles, just like Hubbard did.
Yeah, that's right. He's wearing one on his head. That's you can't see the photos on the audio of this, but if you look up Aleister Crowley, you're gonna be ready for some laughter. This guy he took himself so seriously, and when you really look at his collected works, you're just, what are you fucking talking about, dude? I can't decipher that guy's works, and there are people who tell me it's very deep, and I think it's just very deep piles of nonsense is what I think.
Yeah, Crowley's a fascinating figure, but he's not an academic. He's not deeply versed in things that he looked at. And when you look at people who are deeply versed, and say Aldous Huxley with the perennial philosophy, which I don't think is deeply versed enough. I'm very much of the point of view that there is no perennial philosophy. The fact that there are certain commonplaces between belief systems, you have to also look at the disagreements between them. And they are profound, the disagreements between Buddhism and Christianity, for example.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
But Crowley had put forward a very simplistic view of this, whereby all of the deities, you could say, well, the Greeks believed in Artemis. The Romans believed in Diana. This is Hathor to the Egyptians. This is highly relevant because this was the divinity that Hubbard latched upon, the hunter, a huntress. They are not the same thing in those systems, but Omar Garrison was hired by Scientology and paid a large amount of money to write a biography of Hubbard. He'd already written 2 pro-Scientology books, which are relatively accurate, though they do miss a lot of information to get there. Omar was then paid a lot more money not to publish the biography. She paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to shut up. And one day he arrived on my doorstep, thousands of miles away, no appointment, knocks on the door. I've got Omar Garrett. I've never met him, never heard from him. He's right there. He comes into my house and he says, I've come to see you because I'm tired of having my door kicked in. But the Scientology keep coming to try and get back the tens of thousands of pages that he had from the Hubbard archive, which showed the real story of L. Ron Hubbard. And he said, I'm tired of them doing it. And so I want them to know, I'm going to tell them I've been to see you. And if I'm attacked in any way again, I'm going to give you all of the documents. And as a sign of good faith, this is the blood ritual. So here's this document that was named during the Armstrong case in 1984 in LA. And he said, you can't copy it, you can't make notes, but you can read it. And it's a handwritten L. Ron Hubbard, that famous handwriting, L. Ron Hubbard signing a pact with the Egyptian goddess Hathor, the destroyer of mankind, as she is known in some texts. She's like many of the deities she has, she's Janus faced. She's a spotted cow that is the feeder of humanity, but she's also the destroyer of mankind. And that was his thing, all the way through Scientology as well. I don't think he ever lost that set of beliefs. I think that was always kept hidden from us. And something else was going on, which is a conversation we've had about the magic before.
That's right. It reminds me of the tell me if I'm accurate, but it reminds me of the bad ghost, the bad evil monster in Ghostbusters. Had this Egyptian.
We're really getting into the deep theological perspective here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just sort of thinking if it just makes me smile to think that was the entity that L. Ron Hubbard entered into a pact with and worshipped in a way, right? Is the Ghostbusters monster, right? It's like, okay, that's who
much.
He was.
And we as I say, we went through Hubbard and the occult in some, and there's a thing on my channel, in fact, a couple of things on my channel about this, which Spike will probably grace us with in the description. But you have this confusion, this idea of this guy who is claiming that he's a wounded war hero, a nuclear physicist who studied with gurus in the East. None of this is true. None of it is even vaguely true. And the particular claim is that he cured himself of his war wounds. He was crippled with physical injuries to hip and back. I love the use of that word, physical, in case we thought they were metaphysical or something like that. And injured optic nerves, he claims. Now, having gone through all 800 pages of his Navy record twice, and the second time with an officer who'd served at the same time as Hubbard, and so we went through his record and showed that what Fletcher Prouty was saying about there being a sheep-dipped file was complete nonsense. It rested upon the idea that he has the number 16 at the left-hand top of all of his orders. And in fact, my friend also had the number 16, and it does not mean Navy intelligence. It means, as it says in the file, if Fletcher Prouty had looked, you're a member of the US Navy Reserve. And Hubbard joined the Navy before the war and was put into the reserve because they didn't have a place for him. And then he served in public relations and as an intelligence officer, meaning he gave talks about how to recognize enemy shipping and enemy planes, and he censored letters. He never worked as an intelligence agent.
Right.
But in this period where he's meant to have developed this wonderful technique while he's at Oak Knoll Naval Hospital, we find here this letter, which comes from the Veterans Administration files. And this is a letter of 1947. It's dated October the 15th. It's signed L. Ron Hubbard. And he says, this is a request for treatment. After trying and failing for 2 years to regain my equilibrium in civil life, I am utterly unable to approach anything like my own competence. This is a man who's claiming to have cured himself with Dianetics. My last physician informed me that it might be very helpful if I were to be examined and perhaps treated psychiatrically or even by a psychoanalyst. Toward the end of my service, I avoided, out of pride, any mental examinations. This is during the year he spent in Oatnall Hospital, hoping that time would balance a mind which I had every reason to suppose was seriously affected. You're not kidding. I cannot account for nor rise above long periods of moroseness and suicidal inclinations, and have newly come to realize that I must first triumph above this before I can hope to rehabilitate myself at all. Now, he didn't rehabilitate himself at all. And within about 15 months of that, in January 1949, he's writing a letter from Savannah, Georgia, to his literary agent, Forry Ackerman, saying he's worked out this treatment, this approach whereby you can rape women without them knowing about it.
He said that. He actually did say that. That's not an exaggeration or hyperbole.
No. And he doesn't say anything about any benefit of this from this method.
That's right.
It's, in fact, a form of hypnotism that he's been working on.
That's right. And back up 1 second to that letter. I just want to ask you, this was the basis of his continuing claims all the way through the 1960s to get VA payments for disabilities. Is that right?
He received disability payments until the day of his death.
Oh, all the way until the 80s.
Yeah, wow. He was getting $38 a month because his disability was considered to be relatively trivial.
Right. Right. But he begged for that money.
He did. Yeah. And of course, we have the famous affirmations where he's getting himself ready for the examinations. And yeah, when the examination's over, you'll be fine again.
That's right. That's right.
Profoundly involved with hypnotism. And if you want to, we both know about phobia induction and the way that you make people frightened of things. And Scientologists are frightened of any word that begins psych. The prefix psych is not allowed. And that's because of Hubbard's fear of it. And it works two ways. One is that he was psychiatrically ill. There are no two ways about that. There was something badly wrong with this man. He was often highly, as he says, periods of moroseness and suicidal inclinations. He was often highly distressed. And that happened throughout Scientology. I interviewed quite a number of people, from Barbara Cloden, his girlfriend in 1950, who became a psychologist later. And she said he'd spend 4 days in bed. He wouldn't get out of bed when he's writing Science of Survival.
4 days.
4 days in bed.
Yeah.
And then Jim Dinkhalsey, the late Jim Dinkhalsey, who looked after him in Queens, New York at the end of 72, beginning of 73, because they were frightened that he was going to be, if anybody knew where he was, he'd be extradited in the French case that was going on. And he talks about, these terrible low moods. John McMaster, who was the world's first real clear in 1965, he told me that Hubbard was so often sat crying in the corner. This idea of this bulletproof, brilliant, superhuman man, it's complete nonsense. It's a fabrication and something that he had to perpetuate so that people would follow him.
That's right. And you can actually see it on film when you watch him. We got the opportunity to watch that Afternoon at St. Hill video a couple weeks ago. First time I'd ever seen it. And boy, was that interesting to watch Hubbard on film, years out, years removed from Scientology. And so I'm no longer having to engage in the cognitive dissonance of making him into a hero. And watching him bumble his way through this video, this film that he made, and the fact that he chose to shoot this and then send it out in the quality and state that it was in, with him presenting the way that he was, he looks incompetent in every single shot. He looks uncertain. He looks he's fumbling around. This is my OT guru. it was quite illuminating to do that this many years out, to see original, something I had not seen before. Right. So I could respond to it like, oh, this is completely new to me.
Yeah.
It was a whole picture of the man.
Absolutely. I mean, we have a copy of The Shrinking World of L. Ron Hubbard on the channel. And, I'm a big fan of Charlie Nairn, who made it. Incredible man. But seeing Hubbard sitting and blinking at the camera, and this man who's meant to be the world's leading expert on public relations.
Yeah.
And, he just can't hack it. He can't do it. I had no second wife. I had a first wife and a third wife. I'm not very good at. He did say he wasn't very good at mathematics, so to be fair.
That's right.
And your followers believe in reincarnation. Pause. Sorry. Do you believe in reincarnation? Pause. Your followers believe. Oh yes, they believe. Yeah.
Oh yes.
And I have no Swiss bank. I have one Swiss bank account. It's like he doesn't know where he is or what's going on.
That's right.
And as you say, we saw him through colored lenses. We rose tinted spectacles. We wanted him to be this wonderful daddy figure who had resolved all the profound questions of the universe. And we come away and it's just like wet tissue paper.
That's right.
There's nothing there.
That's exactly right.
And I sort of go through a little bit about the second wife he didn't have.
Oh, yes. There she is.
Married.
Sarah.
And onto, of course, the famous OTO cross, which becomes the Scientology crossed out cross.
That's right.
Or double cross, as I like to think of it. Then, of course, you have Ron auditing tomatoes.
Yeah, there it is.
I couldn't understand why it was that, before he sticks the nail into the tomato to give it the pain, he's already put the crocodile clips into it.
Right.
I mean, and of all the stupidities, if we want to go off onto the topic of nutrition, the only thing you can eat without killing anything is fruit. Take the seeds out carefully, but the fruit is not alive. So the idea that the plant is, why wasn't he checking the stems of the plant? He also at this time claimed that he had created the ever-bearing tomato, because the man was so ignorant of gardening that he didn't realize that tomatoes are perennial plants, which we grow as half-hardy annuals in this country because the winter will kill them outdoors. But you can, I've overwintered tomato plants myself, so I know this is true in trying to hybridize them. So he invented this thing. And then, of course, what he's doing is subjecting tomato seeds to nuclear radiation, which is... there's an organic grapefruit called the ruby red, or I think it's the star red. And people sell this organic grapefruit without realizing it was originally made by nuclear mutation. I'm not sure that's really okay. It's not as good as the Florida pink anyway, so going to eat grapefruit, eat the Florida pink.
And I remember him making claims in his lectures about this because I was so fascinated with it as a Scientologist. I remember him making claims about record-breaking crop sizes and growth with these plants because they were. He talked very specifically about how they were monitoring the humidity factors, the temperatures, the soil content, all this stuff in these greenhouse conditions. Hothouse, he called them a hothouse, and how this was so carefully controlled and how you could precisely, like with precision, make micro adjustments in these things and end up with these bountiful crops. And I think back to this now because I sort of took all that in at the time. And then I'm thinking then and now, well, how come nobody else ever heard about it then? Like, how come nobody ever heard anything about this? Like, if it was that successful and that incredible in terms of results, people would be banging down a path to your door. You know what I mean? Like there would be interest in this, Ron. And it's the same way how he talks in the 50s about how we can, cure psychosis. Well, we have the cure for that. We can figure that out.
No problem.
If you had a cure for psychosis, what? Like he just tosses these claims off as though they're nothing. And they just kind of go in one ear and out the other. And in Scientology, you just kind of oh yeah, well we're just part of this super group and we just have all of it, and it just you just don't really think the thought through, you know. It's a weird phenomenon now that I think back on it.
Isn't it? I mean, his claims in what 1952 that he could cure cancer and leukemia
Yeah,
and raise people from the dead.
yeah, yeah.
And he's sort of talking with Karen de la Carriere a year or so back. She said, you know, it's the same every time you say none of these claims are true. And the Scientologist looks at you and says, didn't you have any wins?
Right. That's right.
Didn't you ever get high on this stuff? You know,
That's right. That's basically what they're asking is, didn't you ever get high on this? Because the high justifies all of it. We keep circling back around to that because it's such a powerful point.
Hmm.
You just go blind. You just do. You just go blind to it, you know, and it's never as stark to you as to when you come out of the euphoria and come down from the bliss and look at reality in a different way that you go, oh my God, was I fooling myself? Because that's what ultimately what we're doing is we're fooling ourselves.
Yeah, I
And
mean, when I first, you know, and again, it's one of those phobic words, hypnotism, that as a Scientologist, even though Hubbard said frequently in the 1950s, to understand what we're doing, you have to understand hypnotism. You know, it's a clear, bold statement made by Hubbard himself. And he recommends books. Hypnotism Comes of Age by Wolfram Rosenthal, for example, which I read. And Hubbard recommends the book, guys. If you want to understand Scientology, you've got to read the books he recommends. 25 Lessons in Hypnotism is another one. And looking at these things, you find that this is what he's actually working with. He's working with this capacity to get people to believe something. And when I first saw descriptions of hypnotism, having been as phobic as any other Scientologist about the brain, hypnotism, not so much for psychiatry, I'd met a nice psychiatrist, so I knew that the broad generality that Hubbard used about psychiatrists was not in fact true. But nonetheless, this thing of, I saw a list of states that are induced during hypnotism. And the first thing on the list was euphoria. I'm kind of going, very good indicators. Oh dear. So if you repeat something over and over again, you will get to the point where you dissociate and you trip out. You space
that's
out.
it. And that
and your
is
needle is floating.
That's right. And that is the end phenomena of every single Scientology process.
Yeah, very good
Every
indicators.
one of them.
Euphoria.
VGIs, right? Euphoria. And you literally just broke down the anatomy of a Scientology auditing right there.
Yeah, and that's all you get. And then you get that, of course, the built into that is the pretty much 3-day cycle. It's going to be variable for people, but you see it after faith healing that somebody will, you know, get up and walk from their wheelchair, and 3 days later they are in the most agonizing pain they've ever been in because they've now stressed muscles that have not been properly used for a long time.
That's right.
And this becomes the roller coaster. This becomes the idea in Scientology of PTSness, this terrible, bizarre expression, potential trouble sourceness.
That's right.
that you are now post-traumatic stress, which is what Scientology does in fact induce, that you're now down because you've lost the high. And that idea of a perpetual high, it's written into so many religious systems, this idea that you'll achieve bliss. As a Buddhist, and which persisted for me through Scientology and beyond, as a Buddhist, I got to about age 50, about 20 years ago, and sort of went, people are trying to get blissed out with this. They're meditating to get blissed out. That's avoidance. That's just not looking at what's happening in the world. You know, and while it is good to have, you know, deep breathing, I'm all for mindfulness. I'm not that interested in meditation. I learned in a Zen monastery. Nobody's going to impress me with this stuff. It's the breathing that's the important thing. So you breathe slowly, you feel better, your cortisol release goes down, you're less panicked. That's great. but then investing in this idea of being in this state all the time. No, we need our memory. We need the past. We need to be aware of what's around us. So fitting ourselves into this happy, happy, happy state, it's a concentration camp for the mind. It's not a beneficial thing to do. And
That's
sadly,
right.
our whole society is now trying to do it through mindfulness. So
Exactly
then
right.
we move on to some pleasant images. These are the
Oh, yeah.
Commodore's messengers in their hot pants who
Yes,
served Ron Hubbard. And
that's
here we
right.
have
That's what we looked
a
like on the
photograph
boat.
from the Scientology publication, Auditor number 41. And we've identified the smiling man here. That's Beren Berez, who was thrown out of Scientology for using one of Scientology's vessels in California to smuggle large quantities of drugs from Mexico to the US. So his ethics.
Oops.
But I was amazed when I finally, I'd never seen this thing when I was in Scientology. And the picture credits,
And the picture, by the way, is two people manhandling a person off of their feet up vertically, or rather, they're carrying him horizontally, about to throw him off the side of the boat.
Yeah, and it says students are thrown overboard for gross out tech and bequeathed to the deep! Exclamation mark. What got me, it's a double spread in Auditor 41, and it says the photo credit is L. Ron Hubbard. So if anybody thinks he didn't know about this, and of course I've interviewed many people who were ordered to be overboarded, 25 to 40 feet. The high diving board in our swimming baths is 14. So 25 to 40 feet, thrown into the water in Corfu Harbour, where other ships were letting out their human refuse. So there's human excrement in the water. You might be blindfolded, your ankles tied, thrown over, and it might be for being 2 minutes late. Gross out tech. It might be for that. I interviewed Neville Chamberlain, who's not to be confused with Neville Chamberlain, of course. One of them was quite thin, the other wasn't. He's an incredible guy. I really liked him.
Yeah.
But he's a con artist. What can we say? He's a guy who that Hubbard devised this term called doing a NEV. Nev was one of the 19 original Sea Project members. He was 16 when Hubbard drafted him in. And doing a NEV meant you've done exactly what the issue says and nothing of what the issue wants. You've followed the letter, but not the spirit. And that was called doing a NEV. And Neville, the first time I asked him about overboarding, and he was the first person I did ask, said, oh, well, and brushed it off. And then a week or so later, I got him at the opportune moment. And I said, what was it really like? And he collapsed. It was terrifying. You didn't know if you were going to be on the list. So you take your watch off, you take your shoes off, you'd be ready to be hurled overboard. Kind of going. So he went from developing a technique that's going to relieve trauma, Dianetics, to traumatizing people.
Yeah.
How does this work? How does this make any kind of sense?
Yeah, that's right.
And he became tyrannical at that point. Let me move on to the Racket Exposed, where he is saying that we need to, this again was in the Auditor newsletter, which was sent out to all Scientologists. And it lists a bunch of people, and it says they're declared suppressive persons for pretending to have and distribute forged and altered upper-level materials. And it says any Sea organization member contacting any of them is to use auditing process R245.
Oh, there it is.
Which is route 2 from Creation of Human Ability. And when he demonstrated this in the original lecture, he had a Colt 45 and he fired a bullet through the floor. That's what R245 is. So here we have him openly ordering murder.
That's right.
There's no record that anybody did it, but
instant exteriorization process.
That's it. Frowned upon in our society at this time.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the quote
right there
in the original work. And he made mention of it in other places as well. This was a joke that was really insider baseball language for, go kick the shit out of these people for me. I'm completely okay with that.
Well, the board members of the Australian, the Victoria inquiry, Kevin Victor Anderson, there was an R245 order put out on him. And it's one of those kind of responsibilities of leaders, the Simon Bolivar policy, where he says, of course, the leader doesn't need to know what you're doing, but go and do it anyway.
That's right.
Let me have a little handwritten note.
Let me say this real fast, by the way, just to harp on this for just a second, because it's important to how Scientology actually operates and how they operated from the very beginning. This was demonstrated quite well on film by Paul Thomas Anderson in The Master, where the Freddie Quell character, the follower character, would go and literally go beat up on people who had been openly critical or hostile to his guru. And that's exactly what Hubbard was encouraging and ordering here. This is not subtle. I just want to underline this and boldface it for a second, because these little points like that can feel like minutia and get missed. And that yet this R245 thing was actually used in multiple places and was a direction by Hubbard in code language to go, to give people the authority to go do horrible things to other people. In a way, it was the original version of fair gaming.
Absolutely. And that contempt that is shown for the non-Scientologist becomes much worse when you're dealing with somebody who's a critic of Scientology or an ex-Scientologist. Yeah. And I mean, L. Ron Hubbard Jr., and I take the view, I was in touch with him back in '84. He was very helpful. And he was very open. He was very, very much, I'm a chip off the old block. I'm like my father. Treat me that way. I'm not an upstanding citizen. I've done awful things. And I came to believe that what he reported from his father, so he said his father, stood at the gates of hell and took the magic from the same guy that gave it to Hitler and this kind of stuff. These are stories he was told by his father. So they're stories told by L. Ron Hubbard. But when he relates something as his own experience, I've never been able to fault him. There are stories, however, I can't prove, him claiming that his father had murdered 7 prostitutes. He had flown cocaine into the US for his father, along with the mafia, working with the mafia. These are things, they just seem outrageous. And one would need to see evidence of them. They're frightening statements. But I can confirm that during the Philadelphia doctorate course, there was a fight. Some marshals came along and Nibs Hubbard got into a fist fight with them. And Nibs was a big guy. And he said, whenever anybody needed handling between 1952 and 1959, when he left because his dad wouldn't pay him enough money to keep his kids, in that time, there would be physical intimidation of people who opposed Ron Hubbard. Right. So just to, underline that, this is a handwritten note from L. Ron Hubbard, which maybe some people haven't seen. It's right here, printed in a little book. It says October the 30th, and it's called Anybody, and it has the L. Ron Hubbard monogram by that. It's in his handwriting. If anyone does anything to get any of these organizations in bad publicity, such as narcotics charges, drunk driving, or other unsavory data, I have a policy. I will beat their teeth in personally. Sincerely, L. Ron Hubbard. So what are we meant to make of that? Either it's a genuine threat or he's an imbecile. There don't seem to be any other choices. It's either childish bravado or it's a real threat.
That's right. And we would always reframe it depending on who you were as a cult member and your value system, you could say, or your moral foundations, right? You always end up reframing this crap, reinterpreting it in your own mind to, oh, well, he's just a tough talker. He just means he's not really going to go punch the guy in the face. He's just going to bring that level of discipline and seriousness to this to really show how important this is. Like, this is how I would, as a Scientologist, make that make sense to me. because it wouldn't make sense to me to just go punch somebody in the face. But I could take that as a metaphor or something, right? You know, something like that. And that's how I would interpret those kind of things when I was in the church. And it really shocks me looking back on it, how easy it was to do, because I do that many times.
He actually put the concept forward by redefining the idea of being reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
So he's saying that when you see something not for what it actually is, but you justify it, you intellectualize it, you excuse it, then that's being reasonable. And we shouldn't be reasonable with Scientology.
That's right.
If Ron Hubbard said it, as the technical degrades in keeping Scientology working say, he meant it. And we're not allowed any interpretation. There is no leeway. So, you know, I can't imagine L. Ron Hubbard in a fist fight with anybody. I think he was a sissy boy, but you know, it would have been interesting to watch.
Oh, come on. He learned judo from his uncle as a kid. He stood on a 9-foot tall fence and beat up the entire McClure gang. And he used judo to defeat those guys who attacked him in the street when he was, otherwise occupied in the hospital or something? What was that?
Yeah, it was 3 petty officers in Hollywood on the 25th of January, 1945. An issue called Communication and Isness from the late 50s, where he makes that claim. Russell Miller, I'm not sure that he got into Barefaced Messiah. Obviously, I worked very closely with Russell. He had my manuscript to base his book on, because I couldn't get a publisher at that time. And I'd just given in. I approached 50 publishers. 11 of them said they'd like to do it, but there was no money in it. Russell, being I think the highest paid journalist in the UK at the time, working for the Sunday Times, could get a publisher. He'd already got books on Hefner and Getty out. And so around he went to find out. And one of the stories he got, and I don't think it's in Barefaced Messiah, the 4 members of this family that L. Ron Hubbard said he'd beaten up, he'd jumped off the fence and beaten up. Hubbard was claiming to have been, I don't know, 9 or 10 years old at this time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The oldest member of this family, he traced them. They really did exist. The oldest member was 18. So how a 10-year-old,
right,
fairly insignificant 10-year-old, I'm afraid to say, had managed to beat them all up. He lived in his imagination. He lived in this world where he was a superhero. He was an operating thetan. He was a god. And, you know, he could... There was a statement made in Scientology which confused the hell out of me, which was that you could change the future, you could change the present, and you could change the past. Now, I could see how you could change the future. That makes sense. Changing the present, well, you can give it a try. Changing the past. And eventually, I learned the L. Ron Hubbard technology of changing the past. It's what we call lying.
Exactly. And I think, you know, you have to wonder, and it's really purely subjective, you know, you have to wonder, though, did he just remember his life this way? Or did he know he was... It doesn't really matter one way or the other. The practical consequences are the same. But you always have to wonder, you know, did he really know he was just full of shit?
I found this thing...
Secret Life of Walter Mitty, you know what I mean? He just like, it's like, no, man, this is my life.
The other one is Billy Liar, which is, and there's a movie of it with, I think, Tom Courtenay in from the 60s. And it's even closer to the L. Ron Hubbard story. I really wanted to make a movie when, what's the Going South, Paul, the film director who came out of Scientology.
Paul Haggis.
Paul Haggis. I was in touch with him briefly, and I went, look, a great movie. You take Billy Liar and you put L. Ron Hubbard into it. Now, Billy Liar is about a young man who you see on the screen what he imagines, and then you see the reality. And I just thought that would be a great thing to do with Ron Hubbard. So there's a point where Billy is upset with what's being said to him in his mum's kitchen. And so he imagines himself with a Tommy gun mowing the people down. And, you know, L. Ron Hubbard, that, you know, but Paul Haggis said he didn't want to do that. So if there are any movie directors out there, I'd love to work with you, and we can certainly get a lot closer to the Ron Hubbard story than The Master did. It's an interesting film, but while
Yes.
they were doing it, the rewrites were coming in daily because the lawyers were saying you can't say that because it's quite evidently based on Ron Hubbard. The Philip Seymour Hoffman character is Hubbard.
That's
And
right.
they just moved it further and further away. So,
Yeah.
now he's dead. We can do what we like. They can't sue us.
Right.
Okay. Um, Perhaps the most sensational document that I encountered in researching, and of course I encountered a lot of sensational documents, a lot of stuff that had never seen the light of day. A lot of them letters. And there was an instance where Gordon J. Melton, the apologist for Scientology, who thankfully is no longer apologizing for them, said that the reason that Russell Miller and the likes of Russell Miller and myself, couldn't actually tell the true story of Ron Hubbard is because we didn't have access to the archives. Now, the first thing I would say is, look, you can write about the Kim family without having their diaries. That's a stupid idea.
That's right.
But I did have access to the archives. I'm going to admit this publicly now because it's you, Chris, and I know it's safe. You won't tell anyone.
No, no, it's just between us, Jon.
While Russell was finishing his book up, a friend of mine was given a letter from the archives to date, and they didn't realize that he was a friend of mine. And he gave me a copy of this letter, and he said it dates to August of 1938, and it starts, "Dear Skipper," the term he used for his first wife. He did have a first wife, by the way, Polly, Margaret Louise Grubb. And this letter caused a little bit of a rift between Russell and I, because the guy who'd given it to me said, look, if this ever goes public, they'll work out it was me. And I'm in a very sensitive situation. I've got a huge collection of material, Scientology material, enormous collection, the biggest private collection anywhere. And he wanted to sell it, and it was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. And he knew he could only sell it to Scientologists. So if he was declared suppressive, that would be gone. So it was very significant. He'd spent decades building this collection, and just unbelievable. 4 rooms full of material.
Wow.
And the people would come out from Gold to, David Miscavige's people would come out to look at this, and there was a room they were never shown, the Black Room, the room where all the negative stuff was. Now, I had access to all 4 of the rooms. I'd already written Blue Sky by the time I met the guy, but the chapter on Wichita and what happened with Don Purcell comes completely from him. That was material I didn't have. And the stuff about Jack Parsons suing Ron Hubbard in Florida came from him and another guy that he was working with. But he said to me, look, show this letter to Russell. And I said, I don't think that's safe. You're in such a position. The other thing was, he didn't want to be harassed,
Right.
oddly enough.
Right.
And so the deal was that Russell could have a copy as long as he promised not to use it. He used it. I got a phone call when Russell, because I was there from this before contracts were signed with Barefaced Messiah, all the way through. I was the only paid researcher through the 18 months it went on. Had a great relationship with Russell. He's an incredible guy, really lovely guy, and a brilliant biographer, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
But we got to this point where I get a call from one of his lawyers saying, Russell's too scared to call you because of what he's done. And I'm sorry. He said, look, Scientology have sued to get an injunction against publication in England of the book. And every document that they've questioned came from you, all of them. Okay. And we can't win without you. But Russell's quoted the 1938 letter.
Right.
And so that was really difficult. It's like, I've got to protect this book.
Mm-hmm.
I'm furious. My friend was harassed. He couldn't sell his collection. In the end, he got about a quarter of what it was worth, about $100,000, because it was bought by somebody who was opposed to Scientology. But this letter is the most significant document in all of Scientology. It's been registered by Scientology. The copyright is claimed by Author Service Incorporated. You can get it from the Library of Congress if you want a copy. And there's a part of it here. Personal immortality is only to be gained through the printed word, barred note, or painted canvas, or hard grabite. I think he meant granite. Foolishly perhaps, but determined nonetheless, I have high hopes of smashing my name into history so violently that it will take a legendary form, even if all the books are destroyed. That goal is the real goal as far as I am concerned.
There it is. There it is. And that's what I base all of my statements on. When you hear me talk about L. Ron Hubbard achieving immortality by living on in the minds and hearts of his followers, that's exactly what I'm thinking about when I'm saying that. Because that was the goal. And he was plain about it. 1938. You know, this is pre-Scientology. This is life goal stuff for him.
Yeah. He's 27 years old. And he wants to smash his name into history so hard that even if all the books are destroyed, he will be remembered.
So if you've ever wondered about the validity or reality of that vault project, it is the ultimate creation of his destiny, of his purpose in life, is to immortalize his words, his writings in vaults that will never, ever, ever fall apart. So 10,000 years from now, there they are. Who else is doing that?
And the whole,
I've never heard of anybody doing that.
The whole project behind it, the Church of Spiritual Technology, which I got very involved with in, while it was being created in the 80s, we managed to, because they wanted religious tax exemption, we got into the documents they put into the court in Washington. And there you find that L. Ron Hubbard left $648 million. That's what he hadn't managed to spend.
Wow.
It's trivial compared to Mahesh, who people call great teacher, Maharishi. I'm not going to call him that. I'm going to call him Mahesh. That was his name. He left $8 billion. So much bigger fry than Ron Hubbard. $648 million, $500 million of that went to the Church of Spiritual Technology. $500 million. And when it was originally formed and they were drafting up what it was meant to be for, one of the suggestions was that its purpose was to perpetuate the name L. Ron Hubbard. Now, about 15 years ago or something, when Marty Rathbun was still considered to be a real human being by people other than myself, I never had any time for him. The warrior. Oh, come on, pathetic narcissist. Come on, sue me, Marty. Let's see you. Take you on with one arm tied behind my knees. He put in his blog, he said this thing that he'd realized that L. Ron Hubbard wanted to be deified. It was a matter of apotheosis. We haven't even have special words for it. And so I wrote to him. It's the only time I ever did write to him. And I said, you've just said this in 2014 or whenever. Look to Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky, first published in 1990. And there's a chapter which explains, why don't people read this book? It's a comprehensive history of Scientology. Go on to all of the others, absolutely read your book. But the grounding, Piece of Blue Sky was written to explain the development of Scientology, the history of this group, and to show the massive contradictions in L. Ron Hubbard's claims, where Russell was concerned to give a real biography of Hubbard, which he did, and it's excellent. My focus was not that. My focus was to show he was a lying bastard. That not one of the claims he makes is true. And he contradicts them himself. So, and the road to truth must be trod with true steps. Honesty is sanity, L. Ron Hubbard. And his dishonesty was rampant and his insanity was massive. So
That's right.
we then
That's
go
right.
on to a little section about claims, and we've already talked about some of these.
Yes.
News in brief. So we have, this is useful knowledge. With it, the blind again see, the lame walk, the ill recover, the insane become sane, and the sane become saner. Cancer has been eradicated. These are all 1952.
Believe this crap. Cancer has been eradicated.
Eradicated. Yeah, you may not have noticed that yet, but since 1952, there has been no cancer.
Yeah, just in case you were wondering, right? Dianetics actually solved all that back then.
Got rid of it, no problem at all. And State of Clear, which, I mean, in 1950, and it's still there in Modern Science of Mental Health, Mental Science of Modern Health, that 273 people were successfully treated with this. So there are 273 clears before this book was published on the 9th of May, 1950. We haven't heard from any of them ever.
Not one. Not one.
And here in the book, he says what they've achieved. A clear has over 135 IQ, a vibrant personality. I haven't met any of them. Glowing health, good memory, amazing vitality, self-control, happiness, and more. The most valuable thing you will do for yourself and for your family, friends, and mankind is attain the state of clear. You can achieve clear not in years, but within months. The most advanced technology of the human spirit, Scientology. And as you know, the claims are just endless. You know, asthma, bursitis, short-sightedness, a whole list of the ailments that Hubbard suffered from. And,
exactly. You notice that? Ulcers, etc. It's
asthma,
it's
bursitis,
funny how his pathology is always in the list.
Yeah, and never long-sightedness, always short-sightedness.
That's right.
Because he was wearing spectacles to the day of his death. Helen O'Brien, who ran the Hubbard Association of Scientologists during the doctorate course in Philadelphia, said that in the Philadelphia organization, which was the central organization then, they'd put a goldfish bowl, a big goldfish bowl, on the counter for people to throw their spectacles into when their vision was recovered. And she says, nobody ever put their specs in there, not one person.
That's right. And yet you'll find a Hubbard lecture where he makes this very specific claim that in Phoenix, Arizona, they had a barrel of glasses, not even a fishbowl.
Barrel.
So he always takes reality and twists it 180 degrees.
Yeah.
He always does that.
Yeah, and I mean, quite often you can see that he's exaggerating or amplifying something that did happen. You know, he did go on a four-masted schooner called the Doris Hamlin to one of the West Indian islands. Calling it the Caribbean Motion Picture Exhibition was a little bit hyperbolic, we might say.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the claims of cure, there's nothing.
That's right.
You know, you've just got brief remission of symptoms, which of course the people who were with him at the start, it's why nobody seemed to stay with him very long, because, you know, John Campbell Jr., who made him famous, the editor of Astounding, within a few months he was saying he's a con man. Art Sepos, Hermitage House, the medical publisher, published Dianetics, withdrew Dianetics as fraudulent and commissioned Dr. Joseph Winter, who'd worked with Hubbard throughout the writing of Dianetics, to write a doctor's report on Dianetics, in which he says, well, I think Dianetics has some good ideas, but this guy's a charlatan, you know.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's almost checklist perfect, Hubbard's narcissism, in light of how we know that they navigate their way through life, that it's always short-term relationships. They don't have long-term friends. It's actually one of the indicators that when you're looking at somebody in their life, that you can tell when it's always everybody else's fault, when all the bridges are burned in their background, in their backstory, you know, when you ask them about it, it's always the other person. right? These are clear signs. Now, obviously, we all have our issues and problems with people, but I just wanted to point this out because I always consider it a life tip. You know, when I run into people whose entire backstory is mysterious and dark because none of their friends are still their friends and they're not family and there's nothing around, you're just like, huh, really?
Yeah, absolutely. The inability to maintain relationships. And when we look at, even say Mary Sue Hubbard, who stayed with him for longer than anybody else. But by the end, after she's been to prison in 1981, and she went to prison, she signed a confession more than 200 pages long called a stipulation of evidence, and something that all people who've been involved in Scientology should read, where she admits to kidnapping, false imprisonment, bugging, burglary, forgery of false government credentials, theft of an inordinate amount of government material. But, kidnapping, false imprisonment, she's admitting to this, and she admitted to it with a deal that Ron Hubbard wouldn't be tried. He'd be named as an unindicted co-conspirator, as of course Kendrick Moxon, the head of their legal department, is one of the 38 unindicted co-conspirators, and they'd leave it there. So she actually went to prison for him. She was a sick woman. She had hypoglycemia, and some blood sugar problems. When she came out, she wanted to see him. And he lived another 4 years, and he never saw her again. And he had an order that any letter that she sent him, and she wrote to him very frequently, they should cut out any what Scientologists call en theta, anything negative. And so you've got these letters where a razor blade's been taken to them, and they say, "Dear Ron, love Mary Sue."
Yeah,
that's all that's left.
I'll bet some choice words for him.
Yeah. So, there's some stuff about Christianity and about, you will find the cross as a symbol all over the universe, and the Christ legend as an implant 1 million years ago. We have what he had to say about hypnosis.
And just to be clear on that Christianity thing real fast, for anybody who isn't already in the know on that, Hubbard literally said, this is not, again, there's no hyperbole here. Hubbard literally said that all of Christianity, all of Catholicism, all the beliefs of Jesus as a savior figure and a representative of God, all of it was an implant. Was a story that was brainwashed into people spiritually many millennia ago as a control mechanism for populations, so that these space empires could control populations through religion and use a Jesus figure as a Messiah figure to adjust where the population was going when things were getting off the rails.
He also claimed that Scientology was completely compatible with Christianity.
Yes, and then he said that. That's right.
And he'd been to heaven. There's a 1963 heaven bulletin where he's been to heaven, and it's like Busch Gardens.
That's right, in Pasadena.
Yeah.
It's kind of a shabby place, he says.
Yeah, I when I went to Pasadena, I was horrified to find that not only was Jack Parsons' house gone, but Busch Gardens is gone as well. They paved paradise and put up a parking lot.
That's right. That's right. I had the good fortune to grow up 5 minutes away from Parsons' place.
Ah, the parsonage.
That's right.
So, yeah, there's a section on hypnosis, and I noticed I must change that. It's actually hypnosis is a state. Hypnotism is the practice, but we're all of us now using the word hypnosis because it's such a nice word. But Hubbard would say in 1951 in Science of Survival, and I wrote a paper about it, which is on my channel, never believe a hypnotist. So this is what Hubbard said. Yet on the back of his novel Triton, we have his leisure hours are devoted to the study and practice of hypnotism. Never believe a hypnotist.
That's right. And you have to lie to people to control them, and et cetera, et cetera.
And
Hubbard full of these little gems.
I hope that's given a flavor. There is so much more in this tiny little book.
Yes.
And oh, look at that. The suppressive group declare Galactic Patrol. The group calling itself the Galactic Patrol is hereby labeled a suppressive. Oh, I'd forgotten about that. Flag Conditions Order, 1982. How jolly.
Oh my goodness.
And yeah. Oh, Paul Haggis is in here, Celebrities in Psychiatry. So it basically, if you have somebody and you'd like them to understand, I had a friend and I sat with him in a diner once in LA, and he said, you said, and this guy was in fact a rocket scientist who'd then become a psychologist, and throughout this had been involved with Hubbard. He was on the second course in Elizabeth, New Jersey in June 1950. May 1950. And he'd left Scientology, and, we sat there and he said, whenever I mention Scientology to my family, they say it's a religion and we can't talk anymore. And I foolishly said, well, the Temple of Set and the Church of Satan are both registered religions in the United States. And he got very angry with me and started shouting at me because he was very frustrated that he couldn't get it over to his family. So if you're having any kind of problem like that, this little book, Scientology, the Cult of Greed, as I say, it's available as an audio book. I do realize that the study of Scientology and study tech has left many people completely unwilling to read anymore. I get this. It's a terrible shame to have lost that ability, and one should seek to regain it. But nonetheless, it's available as an audio book, as an ebook, as a little print manual. And it's also a good refresher for anybody who's been in Scientology who may not be aware of these things. As I say, it took me 1 hour and 40 minutes to read it out loud. So that's about how long the audiobook is. And you can probably read it in less than an hour, as long as your reading has not been impaired by the study technology of Scientology.
Yeah, don't forget to put your words.
Yeah, oh, yeah, definitely. I'm very careful about that, yeah.
No, this is an important work, and it is short, and it is to the point. Literally every page, we just walk you through some of this for a reason. This is a tool. That's the rain. This is not just a book; it's a tool. And if you think about it that way, maybe it'll be in a bit more of a proper perspective for you, because there's information in here that you can use to help wake people up. If you're clever, if you do it right. Right. If you do it in the right way, you're not throwing it at them. You're not yelling it at them. You're not screaming at them. You're actually talking to people. Right. And if you can get there and you can do that, this is the information that will get them to go beyond seed planting. Here's the damn trees. Here's what the forest has been consisting of that you've been wandering around in for years. Here it is. That's what this actually represents, and why it's important enough for us to have dedicated a whole podcast to it, because it's when we talk about waking people up from a cultic experience, especially with Scientology, you've got to have some facts and evidence on your side when you're going to actually have that conversation. These are the best tools I know how to offer people to have those conversations.
Yeah. I mean, I was very concerned to actually put copies of the documents directly into the text rather than saying this is what, I mean, when Piece of Blue Sky, the original version, came out, we'd had this ruling in the US in the Salinger case, which said you can't print unpublished material. You can't publish the letters, the diaries, the Guardian orders, the harassment orders. I had to paraphrase 60 passages in the book to get it out. And that version, the pirate version of it, is still out there. It's called A Piece of Blue Sky. The remaking of the book, the unabridged edition, which has all 60 of those passages and another 40 for good measure that I thought ought to be in there. That's called Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky. Now, there's a pirate edition. I think the publisher has given up on it. Kensington Press used to publish it. I think they've now given up. I hope they have. But unfortunately, all over the internet, people have pirated it and put it up. And it's the original version minus at least one chapter, because they forgot to type that up, with errors in it with the reference summary incorrect. There are 1,100 references. It was very important to me to say, if you're going to, check me, find out that what I'm saying is true. There it is. That's the new edition.
There we go.
Little clouds and the price tags on them. I think it is so important in recovering from Scientology. You cannot just walk away from it. You cannot just say, "Oh, I'll be fine now." Scientology is a system of implanting. It is the most elaborate system of thought reform ever devised. It makes the Chinese Communist program look childish by comparison. There's nothing like it. And I've studied hundreds of these groups. There's nothing like it in all of history. And people come away from it, and it's like, I don't like this comparison, but I'm going to make it because it's simple. It's like your software has been written. You are now acting out the programs that are put there. So even though you might cut out the language and no longer use the loaded language of Scientology, the concepts are buried deep. And I've seen people who decades later were still caught up in this way of thinking. And it's a hateful way of thinking. It's a way of thinking that has no compassion in it. It's a way of thinking that's sociopathic, that's narcissistic. It's entirely selfish, and it's wrong. It's not good for humanity. And it messes up the people who believe it, because being a sociopath, heck, you don't really make that many friends. You're a predator. And Scientology is making predators. And people don't even realize it's happened to them. So if somebody's come out of Scientology and they haven't found out what hypnotism is, even though L. Ron Hubbard said you've got to know what it is if you're going to be a good auditor, then they're still caught. If they still think that psychology is, a taboo subject that you've got to be frightened of, they're still caught in the trap. And so to get out of the trap, reading what you've written, looking at the many podcasts you've done, to understand the information, to get what you were really involved in. It wasn't something that was going to liberate humanity and turn us all into gods. It was a terrible trap. It was it's a form of psychic vampirism. It's a way of, sucking out the souls from people and enslaving people psychologically and physically. And right now we have somewhere over 4,000 slaves in Scientology, members of the Sea organization. And let me just put a plug. I've recently joined the Aftermath Foundation, which has as its sole objective to help people to escape from their slavery in Scientology. And a main part of that is knowing what the truth is, knowing what really happened, as opposed to thinking you were part of something wonderful and glamorous and magical.
That's right. Yeah, I could not put it better. That was great. That was perfect. Because that's exactly right. And having lived 10 years now out of it, it's taken all this conversation and catharsis for me to be able to say I've overcome all that crap, or at least certainly the big chunks of it.
Yeah.
10 years of this. And that's therapy, that's writing, that's reading, that is discussions, that is podcasts, that is videos, all of that in the direction of trying to get myself out of that headspace, drop all those habits that literally were ingrained in me since I was a child. And you think you're just going to walk away from that or something like that and you're going to be fine. That's not my reality. It's not how that's not how my life has gone. And I've helped, and Jon has helped so many people over the years get past this stuff. And it doesn't have to take forever. I'm not saying you have to take 10 years to do it. That's me. I'm second gen. I grew up with this crap. So it tends to be a bit more multi-layered for us, survivors who were kids in it.
Yes, of course it does.
That's just a reality. That's not me trying to play trauma Olympics. I feel for people who were first generation members and have to overcome their problems and issues with this too. It's not a competition, but it's just a recognition of the deep layers of this. And they do go all the way down. So even when you come out of Scientology and you hate L. Ron Hubbard and you hate the ethics and you hate Scientology and you think the Sea Org sucks and you're not going to be Thetans anymore and you're not going to think that way anymore, great, good job. That's step one.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It goes a little deeper than that.
And it's important. I mean, I have a friend who was talking to some of the NXIVM victims, and he said to them, you know, it'll take you a long time to get over this. And I kind of pulled him up and said, you really shouldn't be telling people that. People will work at their own speed and to their own depth.
Yeah. And
yeah, I've had situations where somebody has come. I had an email this year from a woman who said I'd talked with her in, I think it was 1994, and for an hour, and it completely changed her life. You know, and I'm just the catalyst for that. I didn't do anything other than allow her to be sure of what she'd perceived, which was that she was actually involved in a subcult of Scientology, one of the hundreds of subcults, the independent cults that have grown up since 1950.
Right.
And it allowed her to look at it and change her life. So for some people, it can be a very quick thing. This isn't like auditing. You don't have to have in a few months' time, you'll be clear. You don't have to spend decades doing this to get absolutely nowhere at all. And often it's just a simple realization. And the main realization is L. Ron Hubbard wasn't truthful. L. Ron Hubbard wasn't right. So being able to challenge what he said and realize that it isn't true, it isn't a way to live your life. He was a bad person. He was a destructive, predatory person who was completely screwed up. He had no decent relationships. He had no friends. His relationship with his children, oh, come on. You know, what a terrible, terrible human being. When Quentin kills himself, Hubbard's saying, oh, that's more bad publicity he's caused for us. That's how much reality he had in terms of you know, being a human being. He was a vicious beast of a human being. And the problem is that his philosophy points in that direction. And if you still have this stuff in you, there is this strong chance that you are harming the people around you.
That's right.
And let me say on a personal note, we've known each other for 9 years now, and I have seen your transformation. You know, I have been privy to your transformation. That as a person, you have become a better person. There's no doubt about that. And you were quite a nice person to start with, frankly. But you know, you've worked seriously to understand this problem and to help others understand it. And you know, that's the greatest virtue we can have, to enhance our understanding and share with others and help them to understand and become, oh, here's that Scientology idea, become self-determined rather than being run-determined.
Yes, exactly. Jon, great stuff. Thank you. And thank you very much for those kind words.
Of course.
I have definitely felt the change over the years. It's been awesome. And
you're a happier person now than you were then.
Oh, so much.
Yeah. And me too, even in this last 9 years. You know, we have trod the road to happiness. What can I say?
Yeah, here's the way to happiness. Get out of Scientology. It's the road of there. That's your way to happiness. Exactly.
Great.
All right, okay. Jon, thanks for doing this with me.
A great pleasure as always, Chris.
Absolutely. And I look forward to doing it again. Folks out there, subscribe to Jon's channel. As I have always said, and as Jon so wonderfully said here today in describing this book on the cult of greed, check out the cult of greed, but check out Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky. If I have completely selfishly said, of course you need to buy my book, right? My book analyzes Scientology and it breaks it down and it's wonderful. But if you really want to get Scientology, you got to do both books. You got to get Jon's book because it gives you background and information on Hubbard and what it's up to and how it works in ways that I did not address in my book. And when you do them both, you're really going to get the whole picture, right? Everything else after that is is testimonials and memoirs and stories that are absolutely clarifying and interesting and tell you various aspects of the experience of Scientology, like the Going Clear documentary. You saw a lot of people's stories there. But if you want a breakdown of what it is, that's what we do. And and I hope you guys will check that out.
And if you want to overcome it or help others overcome it, you need to know what it is. It is absolutely, there are some incredible, there are now, I think, more than 100 autobiographies have been published. And they're very poignant and very meaningful. Helen O'Brien's Dianetics in Limbo, I think, is the most poignant. And I don't think it's ever actually been published. She sent me a copy of it.
I have a bootleg.
Yeah. And it should be out there. But so much has been written by journalists, so much has been written by people, Janice Gillum Grady's books showing, and she's so forthright about it. She was a slave. She was a child slave.
That's right.
And, has come away not believing any of it. Bless her. But these are all very, very worthy, but you have to liberate yourself from it. You have to look at what it is. We've both been very careful. As I say, there are more than 1,100 reference notes in Blue Sky. And the principal source for Blue Sky, there are 150 people that, their writings or people I interviewed or testimony they gave, 150 people. To give you some sense of that, Religion, Inc., a book by Stuart Lamont, published about Scientology, he took with 5 people. Inside Scientology, Janet Reitman refers to my book, to Russell's book, says the first 7 chapters are largely based upon them, and then talks to less than a dozen people. So 150 people. But the main witness to my book and to yours is Ron Hubbard himself. And you can check this. This is factual material. This is not something we dreamed up. It's referenced, and you can go and check it.
Exactly. And please do. Please do.
Please do. Yeah.
Yeah, you will find it. You really will. You'll find it incredibly enlightening stuff. Very, very interesting. And not just for the Scientology. There's a ton of Scientology stuff in there. But as we love to do on this show and on Jon's channel, is relating these things to the other groups out there, the other activities out there, even domestic partnerships out there.
Absolutely.
All of this stuff is related. So when you're learning about one, you're actually learning about all. And that's what I find so fascinating about this stuff, to be honest with you. The day that kind of dropped in my head that they're all the same patterns, it was like a revelation.
Yeah,
it was different.
Our friend Christian Sherko, who's counseled more people than I've had hot dinners. It's in the thousands of people now. He's been 50 years doing this. Incredible man. Incredible man. But he, for some time, used Scientology, The Cult of Greed as his primary book, not for people coming out of Scientology, but for everybody else. Yeah. And then I published Opening Our Minds, and he switched to that. Nice. Which uses Scientology very much as to show authoritarian and abusive behavior. And the reason he gave for this, he said, well, Scientology does everything. All of the things you can do to mess with a person, Scientology does. And so coming from any other group, you will recognize some aspect of these techniques. And then with Opening Our Minds, I've sought to apply it just to the psychology of abuse. And L. Ron Hubbard scores pretty high in those terms. Anyway, fantastic. And thanks so much. And we'll talk again in a month or two. Yes. And have some more fun.
That's right. Yep. Okay, folks, subscribe to Jon's channel, subscribe to my channel, like our videos, share them around. That's how you can help us.
That would be very helpful. Yeah. Go on social media and make a noise about us, grab little clips from what we've done and put them up on Meta and X and other renamed things.
That's right. All the platforms.
All the platforms.
Folks, see you next week.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.